Welcome to our webinar today with Jakob Detering. He's the CEO, Managing Director of Impact Hub Vienna, and he will help us to understand the challenges and the related people strategy for his organization, for Impact Hub, and he will also introduce Impact Hub briefly.
So my name is Jakob, or Jakob, whatever you prefer. I'm the CEO, as you've managed, as you've said, from Impact Hub Vienna. And what is Impact Hub Vienna? For those that maybe haven't heard of us, we are basically a community for people that envision a future that is fairer, more sustainable, more inclusive, more just than the current state of affairs. And for the people that have the courage to do something about that. And in concrete, what we offer these people is that we connect them with each other. So think of people from startup world, from corporates, from public institutions, from NGOs, foundations, from the science world, and so on and so forth, really from all walks of life, that we try to connect to each other around topics that they care about, where they want to bring a change, and then also turn that energy that is there into concrete innovations, right? So besides that community aspect, we also offer them an infrastructure. So we run various co-working spaces across Vienna where people can come and work from there and meet and run their own events or come to our events that we're organizing. So it's also a place that you can really touch, feel, and see. And then last but not least, we're also offering all kinds of services and support offers for these people to turn their ideas into concrete innovations. So whether that's an acceleration or incubation program for a startup, or maybe it's a project with a larger corporate where we help them to decarbonize a certain aspect of their value chain. So it's really a broad spectrum of things, but it's all around the question of how can we envision a future that is better for all of us and bring real innovation, concrete solutions that help to get us there.
I think what's very interesting now for our Liebe listeners, how we used to say in Austria, to our audience, is the organizational form that you deploy. Because so we're not talking here a classical hierarchical structure, a centralistic authoritarian hierarchical structure. We're also not talking about agile cells, yeah, but it's something in between. So it does adopt characteristics from the aforementioned structures. And is now organized in circles, actually. So it's a governance that seeks, on the one hand, psychological safe environments, but also productive organizations. Yeah? It's using consent, yeah, which means basically no objections versus majority or versus authoritative vote. In a joint decision-making by people who have shared objectives. Yeah? So shared objectives are already really essential here because that ties to strategy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think there's been a very good description already of sociocracy in general and holacracy, which is the particular system that we apply. It's not so easy to, I think, grasp for the audience because it's quite complex and different to more traditional systems. But I think you've captured most of the critical aspects. Maybe the easiest, and this already speaks to the first point here, to the governance aspect. Maybe the best analogy that I would use is the human body, because the human body also is not really a classical hierarchical structure, right? It's not that there is the one place where everything is decided. Obviously, the brain has a special function, but the liver itself is a quite independent organ that has a specific function and knows what to do, has specific subcells, liver cells in that liver that decide upon whatever needs to be done within that aspect of the body and with that part of the body. And that's a bit similar to how we govern our organization. We give a lot of responsibility into the circles. In traditional terms, we would call them departments, but we on purpose call them circles. And in these circles, then there is roles that are held by people that have very specific accountabilities, have a specifically defined purpose, have also sometimes domains, which means that nobody can take a decision without the consensus of that particular role.
So why do we need a strategy? Actually, it helps us to get initiatives off the ground, yeah, with clear objectives and hopefully with the backing of the executive board. Yeah, and you can already now deduct these comments here from like a generic setting into a people strategy setting. Yeah, then also to align all activities with the same strategic objectives and to give some kind of intuitive direction here. To clearly pursue market opportunities or people development opportunities, to target the right internal and external clients, because we have internal service relations, service levels to internal departments, but also the right transfer pricing points and investment required to that. And then also to carve out the right service bundle towards the people, towards other functions, towards other departments who are in fit with their needs.
We've worked on a model on how we can make sure that we understand ongoingly what is each of our team members actually thinking about organization, how satisfied are they with their job, how they perceive their own performance and of the people around them. And especially as we are growing, again, we're just 50 people, but we've been 20 people 1.5 years ago. So you can imagine that for me as a leader, it's much more complex now to understand what's going on in the organization and with each individual employee. The basic idea is that twice a year, actually, we go through a certain reflection and development process. That's how we call it. Always in June and then in December, we have what we call the reflection month. So in that month, our employees are invited to, in their own pace and time, go through a set of surveys where we ask them all kinds of questions. I show you a few examples in a moment. And then after that, in July, August, or respectively in January, February, their circle leads, in traditional terms, heads of departments, would sit down with each of their circle members and reflect on what that has been inputted into their surveys and what that would mean for us as an organization, for their circle, for the individual employee in terms of what next actions might need to be taken. And these actions can be anything from a request for a salary increase to a change of role or a vocational training or simply a different way of attention towards that employee in order to connect closer to the purpose of the circle or the organization. Right, so that I think it's important that there's always concrete actions defined and then followed up upon at the end of this process. This is not just a process we have designed to give people an answer to the question, hey, how do you capture our needs? No, it's really supposed to really come into fruition through the actions that follow, where we look into 4 factors. What we believe makes somebody have a satisfactory job. Yeah. The first is a purpose fit. Do you really feel connected to the purpose of the organization, but also to the purpose of your circle, your department, to the purpose of your day-to-day roles and jobs? That I think is very important. Without that, it's going to be really tough to have a high job satisfaction. Another element would be, how satisfied are you with the team and the leadership, meaning the people that we work with in your circle, and then the leader of your own circle, and also, of course, the general leadership of the organization. How satisfied are you with that? How well do you feel taken care of or hosted, as you said, Norbert? The third category is learning and development. I think it's one of the most underrated topics. If people are not constantly learning and have the feeling they're progressing, but also have the opportunity to take on more responsibility or change responsibilities throughout their time with the organization. Without that, I think basically the relationship to the job will slowly dry out, right? So we need to have that. And it's not only important for the employee, it's of course also for us important as an organization that people keep learning and keep developing. So that's something we look into as well. And then the last is more banal, maybe the working conditions, right? So how satisfied are people with their contracts, with their salaries, with their working conditions, with the equipment they have, with their desk and the surrounding of where they actually sit down every day.
I don't know whether you see my question, but Jacob, I have one question. I think that communication of strategy is really the core element to get buy-in from your people. How did you approach to the communicational part of the strategy?
Yeah, very good question. I think the first part of the answer is by already involving them in the process. It's not that I give them a final presentation and then that's when they see it for the first time. They have been a very active part of that. So how we do that very practically is that we basically have an iterative process of making the strategy work. And it starts with the circle leads. So in traditional terms, the heads of departments that we bring together. We as a leadership formulate a very general direction and ambition for the next year or years to come. And then we invite the circle leads to co-create with us what that would mean for their specific circles. And that draft, so to say, they would bring into their own circles. And then they have what we call circle talks, where they, for usually 2 to 3 weeks, sit down, sometimes in workshop formats, sometimes asynchronously, sometimes in subgroups, sometimes it's very collaborative, sometimes it's very individualized, and bring back from that then their perspectives. And that can be very different to what was the initial conversation with us, but it can also be aligned. And then that is something we kind of try to reintegrate into the circle talks, into the talks with the circle leads. And that we do 2 times, sometimes even 3 times, until we have something that we feel is very much aligned with what the circle members require, what the circle leads feel excited about, and what we as leadership feel is in the direction of where we want to go as an organization. And I talk about that process so much because by that, I hope it becomes clear that ultimately the communication is not even such a big step anymore because they've been part of that process. Yes, we do actually at the very end of this, we do a team town hall where we bring the whole team together for an afternoon, present them the whole final strategy or an annual plan, and then there's even ways to talk about that and already start thinking about how to make that actionable. But it's not this big reveal, so to say. It is already, it's already for them a known thing with maybe a few tweaks and changes.
But I think my question is because I currently work on the topic of employee engagement, right? And then we're looking into ways how to measure employee engagement. Also, what does it mean? So it was interesting to hear, Jakob, you mentioned that also the third part is also to measure, as part of the well-being survey, to measure the engagement. And my question to you and to everyone is, how do you measure engagement? Do you use some standardized metrics? Because as we know, a lot of organizations have employee engagement surveys, and then there's this pink model that a lot of people use. But yeah, I think it's becoming one of these buzzwords, and oftentimes you kind of hear that people actually don't know what it means. And I recently, to quote someone that we worked with on the topic, she said, you cannot force people into being engaged. You can create an environment that's ideal for engagement, and then you can just hope that they're engaged, right? And then they cannot be engaged all the time. That's another common myth. So to go back to my question is, how do you measure engagement, and also what metrics do you use for that?
Thanks, Dusan, for the question.
Sure,
Jakob.
Two parts. First part is, as for the well-being survey, we actually use the standardized survey design, which is called the ALLBE survey, which is the most known survey for measuring well-being, and it consists of basically various statements that you need to rate on a scale, I think, from 1 to 4 as an employee. And half of these statements actually refer to your level of exhaustion, and the other half relate to your level of engagement or disengagement. And the basic hypothesis behind this is that well-being or a lack of well-being is usually driven by these 2 factors, right? How exhausted are you and how disengaged are you from the organization? So that's just this set of standardized answers, which allow us to then also compare with other organizations, compare to research that has been done on it, because the outcome is quite comparable. Answer number 2 is that we also check on the engagement through the job satisfaction survey, and that would be the purpose fit factor that I've talked about, right? So, I mean, you know it anyways, as just for the general audience, it's not granted or not given that just because we are an impact-oriented organization, everybody immediately feels connected to the purpose of the organization, or sometimes even more importantly, of their own circle or their own roles. And that's something we track here. And that's really the questions, a set of questions that we've designed ourselves, because they're quite particular to our own needs. For instance, we ask their questions like, how much of your day-to-day work is connected to your personal interests and what you're passionate about? Or we address the topic of skill fit. Do you feel that what you're good at is actually reflected in the doing basis, and so on? Yeah. So, but that is a bit more nuanced and a bit more individualized. And usually, we then can look at these two factors.
Yeah. But
obviously, so we can then also measure that on an individual basis, the way being not. Yeah.
There's actually a lot of like cross dependencies and correlations when we talk about engagement. Yeah. And also, just to add on this discussion, one very simplified and also proven standard that is in place already is the so-called Employee Net Promoter Score, yeah, which measures maybe a little bit more of loyalty, but also engagement, right? So it's like a classical engagement index, and it consists of 3 questions. And one question is, would you recommend this employer to your best friend? Yeah. Then, do you want to keep working for this organization in the future? Yeah. And the third one is, do you know your individual development path in the organization? So, and that is summarized in the so-called Employee Net Promoter Score. Yeah. This is how well an employee promotes his organization for himself and for his stakeholders.
Is anybody looking at team roles in the wellness of the employees? Because something I've seen previously is where I assumed somebody was capable of doing something, but it wasn't in their natural. They weren't in their natural role, and therefore they became disengaged. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of tests or use of team role analysis that you're using.
That might be a question to Jakob, yeah, and just like to emphasize, it's about a skill match. So is the skill level matching the requirements, right? So do we put maybe a specialist into a leadership role that would rather stay horizontally in a specialist role, or do we promote him or her into a leadership position that might not be really the best match on the skill level? And how do we help these people to develop this leadership role, right? Right, David, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very important point, and I think we need to acknowledge that this is a dynamic environment, right? People change their interests, the roles changes, the organization changes, the requirements are changing. So absolutely, that needs to be taken into consideration. We do touch upon that in the surveys. I talked already about the skill fit when I mentioned the purpose fit. I think that's a big part of the conversation there. We also talk about it when we talk about development opportunities for people. Where do they want to grow into? And that's not always up. That's also, as you've mentioned, Norbert, also sometimes sideways in terms of just taking over other types of responsibilities. And it's in a particular agenda point in our development talks. So it needs to be brought up every time in a development talk, just to check. Yeah? And then we see. And the beauty is with our governance model, with Holacracy, we are able to make that reflected also in a very smooth and ongoing manner in our governance meetings. I've talked about that earlier in the webinar, that we basically allow each circle to sit together and define and change their roles, their accountabilities, basically on a monthly level, right? So it's a very easy, low threshold opportunity for each team member to change their responsibilities, even without us approving.